Shalom, welcome. I am Rabbi Avraham Fisher, and this is Parsha Highlights and Insights. This week's Parsha is Vayera. It is the second major Parsha that talks about the life of Avraham as well as the life of Sarah. There's a lot to talk about, so let's uh, look directly at the outline of the Parsha. At the beginning of Parashat Vayera, three visitors come to visit Avraham. At the very beginning of the parasha, we are told that Hashem appears to Avraham when he is in Elonei Mamre, which is Hebron, while he is sitting at the entrance of his tent. And we understand that this is not long after his Brit Milah, his circumcision. Matter of fact, Rashi says that this is the third day after the Brit Milah, the third day, which is the most difficult day for recuperation. And yet, Avraham would love to bring guests in. He excels in acts of chesed, of kindness, of reaching out to others. And this is an example of chesed that's called hachnasat orchim, bringing in guests. Indeed, this whole first part of the parasha is going to focus a great deal on chesed. So as Hashem is appearing to Avraham, Avraham sees that there are three people coming, and he welcomes them. He actually runs towards them, despite the fact that he's 99 years old and he's just had an operation. He welcomes them. He welcomes them and invites them to stay, have a meal. And during the time of the meal, they tell him that this time next year, Sarah will have a child. Now, this has been predicted before. Who are these people? Well, it seems that they are not just regular human beings, but that they are angels. And they are coming, among other things, to give tidings of Sarah's impending birth, that she's going to give birth, as well as, Chazal say, as well as to heal Abraham from his operation. They have a third mission, which will come up later on in the parasha. Sarah, who's inside the tent, overhears this and she laughs. And it's because of her laughter, which sounds like she's being dismissive or not being completely believing of what can happen. Hashem gives Sarah Musar, not directly, but through Abraham. And we're going to look at those verses a little bit later on. But Hashem is saying to Sarah, nothing is impossible for Hashem. And then, after they finish, Avraham accompanies his guests, which is part of the mitzvah of hachnasat orchim, of bringing guests in, not only to provide for them, but also to accompany them on the next part of their journey. So he accompanies the guests as they proceed towards Sodom, because that's their next mission, to destroy Sodom, the wicked cities of the plain, which is where Lot lives. And Lot is also going to be spared. And that's part of their mission as well. As they're on their way to Sodom, Hashem brings Abraham into his council. He tells him what he's about to do, that the people of the five cities, Sodom, Amorah, Admah, Tzvoim, and Zoar, are so wicked that they need to be destroyed. Abraham deserves to know about this. Abraham exemplifies chesed, and if something like this is going to happen, as it were, during Abraham's watch, it's important for Abraham to be aware of it. And Hashem says that he has decided the fate of Sodom. However, Abraham argues, he pleads, he prays for the people of Sodom. And his basic argument is that maybe not everybody in Sodom is wicked. Perhaps there are 50 righteous people in Sodom. And he makes the argument of 50 people because if there are 5 cities and each city has 10 righteous people or 10 people who are just barely good enough that they do not need to be destroyed. So maybe in their merit, all of the cities can be destroyed. It can be spared rather, 5 times 10. And Hashem says to Abraham, if there would be 50 righteous people in Sodom, I would spare the entire city because of them. Because if there are righteous people, then the city deserves to be spared. Abraham then lowers the negotiations. Perhaps there are only 45. After all, as Rashi explains, if there are 45, then that means that there are 9 righteous people for the 5 cities, and God can consider himself as the 10th of the minyan in each one of those places. And Hashem says once again, if the 50 are lacking only 5, I will not destroy. And Abraham continues the negotiations, the arguing, going down step by step, always being respectful, not being curt, but rather saying to Hashem, "You are the judge of the entire world. It should not be perceived that you are acting in any way that is unjust." So he proceeds from 45 to 40 to 30 to 20 to 10, and at that point, it seems that there aren't 10 righteous people or 10 people who deserve to be spared. How many are there? Well, one way of looking at it is Lot is going to be spared out of respect for Abraham, and also Lot has some redeeming characteristics, and Lot has a family. He has a wife, he has 4 daughters, 2 of whom are married, but that only makes 8. Even with God, there isn't a 10th in the minyan. And so they will be spared, or they will be offered the opportunity to be spared, but the rest of the cities will be destroyed. At which point, Hashem withdraws from this discussion, and Abraham returns to his place. Meanwhile, 2 visitors proceed and arrive in Sodom. There are only 2 this time, because one of the 3 angels has completed the totality of his mission, which is to inform Sarah that she's going to have a child. But the other 2 missions, one of destroying Sodom and the other one of saving, which had one aspect to it of healing Abraham and now saving Lot and his family, those missions are not yet complete. So they arrive in Sodom, and here they're called angels. I suppose that when they're in Sodom, they kind of stand out as angels. In the presence of Abraham, they don't necessarily stand out. They look like people. But in the presence of Sodom, they do look like angels. Lot greets them, and here we have other examples of chesed, although Lot is very well aware of the fact that Sodom is a place that is opposed to chesed. And that's why when he tells them to go to his house, that they should not go directly because they don't want to draw attention. They shouldn't want to draw attention to the fact that there are guests in Sodom, which is forbidden. Lot knows that the place of Sodom is very, very selfish, and outsiders are not welcome. Well, at first they refuse, but then they agree to go by that circuitous route to Lot's house, and Lot serves them a meal. Very soon after, the people of Sodom surround Lot's house somehow or other, despite all the precautions the people of Sodom found out. And it's very clear that they do not want these strangers, and they demand that Lot bring out the outsiders. Lot protects his guests, and they threaten the people of Sodom threaten Lot, saying, "If you don't let us, have these people that are that are there with you, we will do to you even worse than what we plan to do to them. It's very clear that they plan to do terrible things to the people that Lot has welcomed. And Lot says, well, take my daughters. I have two unmarried daughters instead, which is a perversion, to put it mildly, of chesed, of kindness. The angels intercede. They strike the people of Sodom with blindness, and they tire of trying to find the door, and the crowd disperses. And now the time has come to make it possible for Lot and his family to be rescued from the city. The two angels said, "You may take your family before we destroy Sodom." As a matter of fact, they must uh, leave because they're not permitted to destroy Sodom until Lot and his family are clear. Lot tells his sons-in-law, but they don't take him seriously. And so, therefore, they and Lot's married daughters do not make it out of Sodom. The only ones who can leave now are Lot, his wife, and the two remaining daughters. And Lot tarries, probably because Lot is a wealthy person and he uh, hesitates about the fact that he's leaving a great deal of wealth behind. Uh, the angels take matters into their own hands, quite literally. They grab hold of Lot and his wife and daughters and transports them outside the city and says, now you must continue, you must flee to the mountain. And as you're going up to the mountain, do not look behind you. Lot argues, I cannot make it all the way to the mountain. Let me take refuge in the small city. One of the five cities, he says, is small or young, but the word that he uses uh, gives this city, which originally uh, which is originally called Bela, it is now renamed from this point down, and it's called Soar. And the angels say that this request also has been granted. Soar will not be destroyed. Lot can take refuge there. And then the Torah describes the destruction of Sodom. So, sulfur and fire rain down from heaven, and the entire plain with all the cities, four remaining cities, are lifted up and flipped over, thus destroying them. And this destruction uh, creates a cavity in the earth at that point, which eventually brings the salt water, the extreme salt water, into that area, and that is the origin of the Dead Sea, or the Sea of Salt, Yam HaMelech. Meanwhile, despite the warning, as they're fleeing, Lot's wife does look behind, and this is a violation of the instructions, and she turns into a pillar of salt. The sulfur that is raining down from heaven seems to be some kind of a sulfur salt, and that is what happens to her. Avraham, who has never been in Sodom. He's argued for them, but he's never been part of Sodom. Uh, he arises in the morning, and he is permitted to behold the destruction of Sodom from a distance. His righteousness is much greater, so he's permitted to watch the punishment of the wicked. Lot and his family are just barely being spared. Hashem spares Lot and his two daughters. So Avram is able to watch the destruction from a distance. Smoke arises from the area, meaning that this is now a desolate place. And meanwhile, Lot and his two remaining daughters have been spared. At first, Lot and his daughters are in Zoar, but then they leave Zoar and they live Lot lives in a cave with his daughters, and they don't know that whether or not the destruction is continuing. Who knows? Maybe the Zoar also is being destroyed. And the daughters have a conversation between the two of them. There's no one left on the earth. Possibly they think that the entire world has been destroyed. And yet we have to continue uh, humankind. So the only option is to lie with our father. But the only way that that's going to happen is if he becomes drunk. So let's get our father drunk, lie with him, and in this way, each one of us will be able to continue. And so, on the first night, the older daughter, uh, after Lot becomes very, very drunk, uh, the older daughter lies with her father, and the subsequent night they get him drunk again, and the younger daughter lies with him. Both of them become pregnant, and the older has a son, and she calls him Moav, which basically means from father, and that is the ancestor of the nation, the Moavim, the Moabites. The younger one has a son as well, and the name that she gives is not nearly as blatant as Moab, from father. It's Ben Ami, son of my nation. But from her comes Ammon, Ben Ami, Ammon. So that's the Ammonites. And the Moabites and the Ammonites, uh, later on, we come across them uh, inhabiting the area to the east of the Dead Sea and the Jordan. This is the end of our encounter with Lot. So the Torah now returns to the story of Avraham. Avraham relocates. Once Sodom is destroyed, Avraham no longer stays in Hebron, which is where he had lived before, which is fairly close to Sodom. He relocates, and traveling mostly west and south as well, into the land of the Pelishtim, the land of the Philistines. Um, and the reason why he relocates, it seems, is because Sodom is no longer there, and there are no travelers in that area. And so he needs to find another place where he might be able to greet guests. Another reason is he wants to finally dissociate himself with Lot, considering what happened to him through the act of incest. So Abraham is in the land of the Pelishtim, and once again they say, "We are brother and sister." Once again, Abraham is afraid of being killed. The king of Pelishtim, whose name is Avimelech, takes Sarah. This time, Hashem warns Avimelech in a dream that if he does not give back Sarah, who is a married woman, then Avimelech will die. Avimelech confronts Abraham and asks him, "Why did you do this to me? Why did you put me in a position where I could have innocently committed a terrible sin of adultery?" Abraham's answer is two-part. One, he said, "I saw that there's no fear of God here. And in a place where there's no fear of God, anything can happen. People can permit themselves to do anything." And also, says Abraham, the fact is that Sarah and I are half brother and half sister. We have the same father, but two different mothers. And we married each other. That is true. And it's always been our policy to say, as we travel, that we are brother and sister. Avimelech appeases Abraham and Sarah by giving them all kinds of gifts. And Abraham prays for Avimelech and his household. God had said to Avimelech in the dream, demand that Abraham, or ask Abraham to pray on your behalf in order for you to be healed. And so Abraham does. He prays for Avimelech and his household, because up until this point, what had happened to Avimelech's household is all of their openings in their bodies uh, closed up. It wasn't possible for women to give birth, and that's significant. It means that birth was held up, um, because the very next incident tells us about the birth of Yitzhak. They're one right after the other. The birth of Yitzhak is then told. Our rabbis teach us that it's because Avraham prayed on behalf of Avimelech, so that Avimelech's wives, maidservants, and so on could give birth, that Abraham's own wife was answered favorably at this point. Um, this part of the parsha, or from this part of the parasha until the very end of the parasha, has been read not too long ago on Rosh Hashanah. Uh, this section that we're looking at now is the reading for the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and later on I'll show you the reading for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So, at the age of 100, and Sarah is 90, Abraham and Sarah have a child. And of course, they name him Yitzhak, because that is what Hashem said they should name him. Yitzhak, the first one born into the Jewish people, we might say, is given his circumcision at the age of 8 days in accordance with um, the mitzvah. And there is a celebration of Yitzchak's weaning, where Sarah is very, very joyful at what happened. The next episode, which is another test of Abraham, is the expulsion of Ishmael and Hagar. Ishmael is clearly misbehaving. He's going into very bad behavior in a number of ways, and Sarah demands that Abraham expel Ishmael and Hagar, because Ishmael is not going to inherit together with her son Yitzhak. Yitzhak has to be raised in a different environment, not one in which Ishmael is present. Abraham is reluctant to do so, but Hashem instructs Abraham to obey Sarah, and so Abraham does. After all, Hashem says Yitzhak is really your true heir, and because Ishmael is your son, he too will become a great nation. And so Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away. And they find themselves wandering in the desert of Beersheba. The water that they have runs out. Hagar is tearful, and she leaves Ishmael under a bush, because she simply cannot bear to watch what's happening to her son. Her son is dying. And Hashem listens and sends an angel, and Hagar is shown a well of water. She gives water to Ishmael, and he recuperates. And then later on, we are told that Ishmael grows. He lives in the desert of Paran. He is an archer, and his mother Hagar makes sure that he gets married. She finds him a wife for him from Egypt, which is where she comes from. And from this point on, we leave the story of Ishmael. We'll hear about him again later, but for right now, we focus once again on Avraham. Avraham is living in the land of the Plishtim, and Avimelech comes and says to Avraham, "It's very clear that Hashem is with you, and therefore I want there to be an oath between us. Swear that you will not be false to me or my future generations." And Avraham swears that there will not be aggression between the two of them. There's a dispute over a well, and Avraham makes a covenant, a brit, with Avimelech, using 7 lambs as a sign of that covenant. And because there is an oath, which is Shavuah, and the number 7 is Sheva, so those two words resonate with each other. And the place is called Be'er Sheva, the well of 7, or the well of the oath. And then Afterwards, Abimelech and Pichol, his general, return to their place. We're told also that Avraham plants an eshel. Some discussion as to what an eshel is. Could be a grove of trees from which he could provide for food for others, or it could be a tent where he can greet guests. But one way or another, it's definitely a demonstration of Abraham's chesed, and he lives in the land of the Pelishtim for many years. This, at this point, is the end of the Torah reading on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. But of course, this is not Rosh Hashanah. This is Parshat Vayera, and so we continue. But this last part of the Parsha is what's read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and the major text is about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. At first comes the command where Hashem says to Abraham, take your son, your only one whom you love, Yitzhak, and bring him up as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you in the land of Moriah. And so Abraham begins the journey. He rises early, makes the preparations, and 3 days later, he sees the place from a distance, and Abraham and Yitzhak ascend the mountain together, leaving the two servants behind to tend to the donkey. For the first time, Yitzhak initiates a conversation with Abraham and asks, it's very clear we're going to bring a sacrifice because here's the wood and here's the fire, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And his answer is Hashem will provide the lamb. And so they get up to the top of the mountain, and Abraham builds an altar, and thus begins the Akedah. Akedah is binding. He binds Yitzhak hand and foot to prepare him for the slaughtering. According to Rashi, in between the lines, Abraham indicates to Yitzhak that in fact he will be the burnt offering, and God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, but otherwise the burnt offering will be you, my son. And so as Abraham is binding Yitzhak, Yitzhak doesn't complain, because by this point he understands that this is his mission as well. It's his command, and he accepts what Hashem has demanded. Abraham is ready to fulfill Hashem's will. The knife is just about ready to slaughter Yitzhak, when an angel from Hashem tells Abraham to stop, not to do anything to Yitzhak, because Abraham has demonstrated that he is God-fearing. And Abraham notices a ram, and he sacrifices the ram in place of Yitzhak. As Chazal say, in place of Yitzhak means that he asks that God consider the sacrificing of the ram to be equivalent to sacrificing Yitzhak. From that point on, the place is called Hashem Yireh, God will see, but it also means God will provide. That's the same word that was used when, back here, when Yitzhak asked, where is the lamb? And Abraham said at that point, Hashem Yireh, God will see to it. He will provide the lamb. So Hashem Yireh means God will provide, God will see. And the name Yireh forms the first part of the eventual name or renaming of this place, which is Yerushalayim. The Yireh part seems to be derived from here. The angel blesses Abraham and all of his descendants because Abraham has demonstrated his faith in Hashem. And then Abraham returns to Beersheba after the Akedah. Rashi says he doesn't return for a very long time, but That's where he is for a brief period. And then the final part of the parasha, which is also read in Rosh Hashanah, Avraham receives word about what's been happening in his brother Nahor's family. Remember, Nahor had gone with Terach, their father, and Avraham, to they were intending to go to the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, but along the way they stopped and remained in Haran, and that's where Abraham's brother Nahor has been ever since. And it's at this point that Abraham finds out all of the children, grandchildren that have been born to Nahor. And a very important uh, note here is that Abraham hears that among Nahor's grandchildren is Rivka. And Rivka, as it turns out, will be the perfect shidduch for Yitzhak. But that will be later on. So this parasha begins when Abraham is 99. Rashi says, based on the Midrash, that at the time of the Akedah, the time of the binding of Isaac, Abraham is 137. It's that part of Abraham's life that we have been learning about. Uh, if Abraham is 137 at the Akedah, that means that Yitzhak is 37. He isn't a child, he's an adult. And it's important to keep that in mind as well when we imagine the Akedah, this tremendous demonstration of faith in God, which provides merit for all of Abraham's descendants. Now, early in the parasha, I said we would talk about the fact that when Sarah overheard that she's going to have a child, she laughed. But Yitzhak Sarah Bekirba laughed at herself. Lemor saying, Acharei veloti haitali edna vadoni zaken. Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment? Meaning, will I be youthful again? Is it possible for me to have a child? And my husband is so old. My master, the way she says it, my husband is so old. She's expressing disbelief. Now it's at this point that God says, Musar, Vayomer Hashem el Avraham. Hashem said to Avram, Lama zet tzachaka Sarah? Why did Sarah laugh? Lemor saying, Ha'af umnam eleid v'aniza kanti. Shall I in truth bear a child as old as I am? Now, one of the things to note here is that when she actually speaks to herself, she points out the fact that her husband is old. But when God repeats it in the midst of this chastising, he says that she said, I am old. So is God changing what Sarah actually said? And if so, why? So one source that we should look at, the Gemara in Yevamot, where it was taught in the school of Rabbi Ishmael, Gadol HaShalom, peace is a great thing. She'af HaKadosh Baruch Hu shina bo, because even God departed from it, meaning departed from the truth because of it, because of shalom. In other words, God changed the report in order to maintain shalom, in order to maintain peace between Abraham and Sarah. Because at first she said, Vadoni Zaken, my husband is old. And now, when God repeats, as it were, he says, and I am old. And Rashi seems to follow this same reading. The way that Rashi puts it is, Shina hakatuv mipnei hashalom, the text changed, meaning God in speaking here, changed what was actually said because of peace. Shaharehi amra vadoni zaken, because she said, in fact, my husband is old. One thing that we learn here, and that's what the subject of the Gemara in Yevamot is just how important it is to maintain peace. And if it's necessary to choose between peace and the truth, often peace should be maintained even at the expense of the truth. However, the Ramban, in commenting on this, um, tones down a little bit of this apparent, what we might call white lie. He says when she's when God repeats what Sarah had said, namely Ani zakanti, I am old, the Ramban says, Hu perush acharei veloti. This is an explanation, or let's say a paraphrase, of what she actually did say, which is, I am withered. In other words, God is not changing what she said. She said that she's old also. Udvarav emet. Those words are true. So what's the change that God made? However, mipnei hashalom lo ratza legalot ma she'amra v'adoni zaken. Because of peace, he did not want to reveal the additional thing that she said, in addition to pointing out the fact that I am old, namely that my husband is old. Avram would be insulted at this. Ki haya ra'ui sheyomar vani v'adoni zakenim. If God were repeating word for word, or at least idea for idea, what Sarah had actually said, then he would have said in Sarah's name, both I and my husband are old. So God left out that one part. Ki Sarah b'shnehem titzchak, because Sarah laughed about both of them. So, according to the Ramban, it's not that God lied, it's that he left out certain parts of the quote. She did say that she was old. So he repeats that. She also said that Abraham is old. That's the part that he left out. And from this, we can derive that although it is very important to preserve the peace in a family, in a couple, among children, it's very important to preserve the peace. And if necessary, to alter the truth or at least leave out details. The alteration should be minimized as much as possible. Not to out and out lie if it can be avoided, but it is permissible to eliminate, to omit certain facts. But there's no question about the fact that the Gemara that Rashi and the Ramban are both deriving from are teaching us just how important it is for there to be peace in a family and between a husband and wife. And so this brings us to the end of our analysis of this parasha that is filled with ideas, much to discuss, much to learn, lessons about chesed, lessons about shalom bayit, maintaining peace within the home, a great deal about the importance of proper relations between people. I'm very happy that you spent this time together with me, and I look forward to speaking to you again next time. So this is Rabbi Avraham Fisher saying, Shalom.